my main thrust is still the as much direct communication as I can get with people is still my goal. I mean, I'm, even in the thrust of my artwork, I'm interested in the direct interaction with people, the sitter, the person on the street. I'm a people watcher. I'd rather be sitting in a sidewalk cafe than in a forest. That's just me. I'm interested through my portrait art in, the unique thread of humanity that connects us all.
Welcome to the BoldBrush Show, where we believe that fortune favors the bold brush. My name is Laura Orengo-Bayer, and I'm your host. For those of you who are new to the podcast, we are a podcast that covers art marketing techniques and all sorts of business tips specifically to help artists learn to better sell their work. We interview artists at all stages of their careers, as well as others who are in careers tied to the art world in order to hear their advice and insights. For today's episode, we sat down with British-born portrait artist Johanna Spinks. Johanna shares with us her journey of becoming a professional portrait painter after careers in journalism and makeup artistry. She emphasizes the importance of continuous learning and improvement, citing her mentor Everett Raymond Kinsler's emphasis on values, curiosity, and doing one's homework. She also stresses the importance of surrounding oneself with mentors and leaving ego aside to receive constructive criticism for growth. Johanna also reminds us to protect one's mental well-being as an artist facing criticism, especially online. We also discuss tips for starting a career as a portrait painter, working with agents, honoring client expectations, and the power of capturing people's stories through portraiture. She gives us marketing strategies and advice on contracts, productivity, and balancing creativity with social media demands. Finally, Johanna tells us all about her upcoming workshop in a chateau in France focused on Renaissance gilding techniques. Welcome, Johanna, to the BoldBrush Show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to meet and talk with you. Yeah.
Yes, a pleasure to meet and talk with you too. Especially because you've had quite a unique experience, having learned from, one of the most important portrait painters out there, and having had such an interesting trajectory as well. And now you yourself being a very well-known portrait painter, I would say, at least in the circles that you work with, which, gosh, I feel like anyone would want to reach that level if they were a portrait painter, to just live off of commissions and making beautiful paintings as well, which you do. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. That means a lot. Yes, it's been quite a journey. I've been a portrait artist for almost 25 years now. Yes, so what a journey. And Everett Raymond Kinsler was definitely one of the most important chapters of the journey so far, and it was a many years chapter. And yes, and taught me so much about how to paint. Values, the value of values was really his main thrust of teaching. But also, always to be curious. Curiosity was a big thing, and I think all of us artists should keep that going forever, not to get jaded and such. Yes, curiosity, and also doing your homework. Always do your homework. Yeah. So, in terms of doing your homework, Ray was a big fan of prep sketches, and, he would send me stuff that I was working on, with little tidbits of information, how to do it better. For example, a book on Rex Harrison of My Fair Lady that I was painting for the Players Club arrived with, the suggested photo reference and, of course, a little drawing. And I really treasure these now. And this was another one I did for the players, Howard Lindsay, and more notes, just to, do your homework and look at this a little deeper, look at this a little further. This was a Angela Lansbury fax I got, saying, well, let's consider this, to make it more of a caricature was what he was saying about that, or think of making it, more like a caricature. And this was a portrait that I was working on for the Forbes family, Forbes magazine, and he gave me some great feedback there, just the hand in particular. Look how he sort of darkens down most of that hand. So yeah, I would love getting these, and they're real treasures for me now. And I have a whole box of notes and copies of emails. It's delightful. This was a corporate commission I was working on, which I sent for review, and suddenly, sure enough, a week later, this sketch arrived that he had painted. how to keep the value pattern really simple. Yeah, just lovely. And then this was a gentleman originally from Scotland Heritage who was painted in a kilt with a Scottish view. And again, the simple light and shadow and dipping down the landscape horizon. It's just so helpful. I was so lucky, so blessed.
Ah, that's amazing. That is such a wonderful experience to have had with
Yeah.
Everett Raymond Kinsler.
And life honestly has not been the same without him.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm, Yeah, I completely agree with that. I feel like it's so easy to fall into a pattern or fall into a formula and then just stay there and stay stagnant instead of continuing because like with painting especially we know that it's very much a thing where it's about vision and it's about seeing something. And if you stop looking, you'll stop seeing, right? So you need to have
mm,
that curiosity, as you said, to be able to move forward as a painter, to improve, because it's a lifelong thing. I feel like when someone
right.
just stops improving, it's a little bit sad.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the traps of certainly people who become the sort of, prima ballerinas, if you like, and they've got a huge body of collectors, they've got, top-notch galleries, then they can't paint any different. They can't really experiment too much more because they've hit the big time, and not many people do really. But there's also a great mid-level of artistry where you can work comfortably your whole life, which I think
Mhm.
is what I hit. Hopefully, you can never take anything for granted, especially in the economy right now.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I think that is one of the dangers. It's not that they're not curious anymore. It's just that they are almost kind of trapped in,
Mhm.
a way of painting that they have to continue. And I have a very dear art friend who is very, very successful, painting, selling, in the 100,000s or so. And he said to me, if I see a rose he actually mentioned a telephone box because I was British and he liked the red telephone box I did. He said, I cannot go off and paint that because I have to do what my, collector base is expecting and wanting. And yeah, and that really stuck with me, that comment. I thought it was quite sad.
It is. Yeah. And you bring up a really great point because it becomes, oh my gosh, it's like, what happened to painting for the sake of painting? Like what your friend said, he could still paint it. He can't sell it or he doesn't have a collector base for it. And then also, he probably doesn't have time because
Right.
he's so busy taking on commissions or he's so busy
Yes.
finishing pieces for a gallery. And I think that's the point where it gets very, very sad because you're now doing something that you love, but you're also not able to do what you love at the same. It's kind of ironic. You're in like this Schrodinger's cat situation.
Yes, and to be honest, Laura, it'd be lovely to experience that for a couple of years, to be in the 1% prima
Yeah.
ballerina. I'll take it for a couple of years.
Yeah, it has pros and cons. I mean, I have
Yeah.
heard often other, painters who are already in that level, of course, but we want to be in that level. But at the same time, they do say enjoy your anonymity and enjoy those years where you can't, I mean, not that you can't, but enjoy those years where you can paint anything and experiment and
Yes.
enjoy your free time too, because before you know it, your time has been monopolized by exhibitions and taking care of
Mm.
paintings for exhibitions and workshops or whatever else you have to be doing. Maybe even
Yes.
interviews, marketing, like it gets very
Yes.
busy.
Right.
So I completely get that. Um, but before we continue talking about all that, do you mind telling us a bit more about how you got started? And my biggest question is also how you started off in the path of the artist.
Right. Okay. Well, I have been in the arts my whole life. I started out training as a journalist in Britain with the National Council for the Training of Journalists, which was a very rigorous 3-year program, working on a newspaper, and you took your qualifications around that training program. And I graduated that, was in the journalism world for quite a long time, moved to New York, ended up working for the New York Post on Sundays on the city desk as you know, the murder fires, muggings reporter in the morning, calling around all the police precincts. And so that was the early part of my life. You know, I wouldn't say writing for tabloid newspapers is particularly creative, but it is a certain skill set of investigative, knowing how to use a phone, interviewing people, and all of that. That skill set I definitely have taken on into everything else that I've done in my life. So then, you know, time went by. I had a couple of kids. Writing was something that I always thought I was going to get caught out at, that I always had this feeling inside that I wasn't, you know, good enough. So after motherhood, I sort of, well, I'm going to go in a different direction. And I had been around the music world through my husband for quite a bit of time. And I decided, well, I'm going to go off and learn how to do studio makeup and that. And that was an incredible journey. And I had an incredible career doing that. I was signed with Celestine, which is it's just shut down, actually, one of the biggest makeup agencies in Los Angeles. And again, I was learning light, I was learning color. And so then I got actually sick. I got this virus, which I had for 2 years, and I had to stop working in the makeup world. And I signed up for a few art classes in my hometown, and I just absolutely loved it. And I thought, you know, I could actually do portraits here because I had a knowledge of light, I had a knowledge of color theory, and but of course, it wasn't that easy. I didn't know how to draw well, and I had to go off and learn that. And that really has been one of my biggest challenges coming to the fine art world later in life, which I did. So that's been one of the biggest challenges, the drawing aspect.
Yeah, I feel like drawing is, even now, drawing is still the thing that we continue to always hone more and more, because
Mm.
the painting side, you know, the rendering side, it's a bit more obvious and easy, but of course you need that structure of the drawing always to make it work. So drawing is, I always say this, but it's about 90% of a great painting. So I totally get that. Even after years,
Yeah.
drawing is still the most important element. So I get that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and my mentor Kinsler said to me that in his
Mhm.
opinion there were, you know, two types of fine art, or two strengths in a fine artist, and it was rare that a fine artist had both strengths in equal measure, painting and drawing. And I apparently, which I knew, but he said to me, you were a natural painter, but boy, you know, you will always have to work on your drawing your whole life. And at the time I was like, oh, ouch, that hurts.
Oh.
But he was absolutely right. And you know, one of the things that truly helped me around all of this, you know, the noise you have in your head around drawing, I decided to go off and do a year of, and I called it 365 days of drawing. And this was in the very early days of Facebook, so I put it out very publicly. I had a public portrait page when it just began. And this led to just the most incredible experience. And the drawings they weren't quick sketches. I really spent my time on this year. And what happened was the most remarkable thing. I no longer ever had to do this, you know, this, and this, the plumb
Mhm.
line. My brain to hand coordination was forever improved. So I still have to work on my drawing. I do a figure drawing every week, and I do a portrait painting from life every week, just to keep that, you know, and then sketching out and about, you know. So I think it's incredible when you do, and this is a piece of advice I would give to maybe people earlier on the path, the journey, is to surround yourself with people, but try and get a mentor of some sort who, you know, they are further along on the journey, and you know you can trust them, and when they give you advice, you know to listen. And with Ray Kinsler, the one thing that happened with him is he was really a very the more we got to work with each other, the tougher he was on me. And
Mhm.
he said, you know, there is no point me giving you unnecessary compliments. He said, that's not useful to you. I want to give you, you know, the points that you really need to hear about. And he did. And I remember every one of the the harsher critiques, and they always came from a place of compassion and caring. It wasn't, it was necessary. And so I would say, yes, if you can surround yourself with a painter who knows more about drawing and painting than you do, or your particular art form, still life, landscape, that's huge. Because we work in a vacuum in our studios or wherever we paint. you know, um, that progress happens with a little bit of outside help usually.
Yes. Yeah. Having an expert eye definitely helps someone from the outside to look and say, this is the issue.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because, I've had that experience with my students as well, now that I'm teaching a bit, where you almost you don't want to hurt them, but at the same time, you know that
Mm.
by telling them objectively, hey, this is how you improve, they'll improve. Like they need it.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, though, they are a bit sensitive, especially when they're young, and it's like, well, you can't attach your ego to your paintings because your paintings can always improve. Your ego is something else completely, and that's one of the hardest things.
Leaving your ego at the door is one of the biggest challenges in the learning process. And one thing that I learned to do, talking of leaving your ego at the door, was, I was going to the Art Students League of New York, sorry, and the
Mhm,
National Academy of Design to study with Mr. Kinzer over, I think, a 10-year period, in November, in February. And it was a very, very full 2 rooms of students of
mhm,
quite a high level. And I learned to not walk around the room in the beginning of the day or maybe through till lunch, just focus on what I was doing with my canvas, with the model, and with his instruction. Because the moment I started walking around the room, seeing all these wonderful painters, the voices would start in the head like, oh, I'm going to go, I'm not doing this right, or I'm going to go south.
mhm.
So I had to be protective of that side of my learning, and I learned to do that. Yeah, and the other thing that actually someone who had studied with Kinzer before I showed up in his world said to me, when he touches your canvas, put it to one side and don't touch it again. Like, go home with the brush stroke that he has left on your canvas, because his brushwork was extraordinary.
Mhm.
He painted 8 American presidents, all of them living in his lifetime, a who's who of America. uh, you
Mhm.
know just an extraordinary level of painting. So I learned to do that, but that involved leaving my ego aside, because at the end of the day I wouldn't have a lot to show. Whereas other people who had worked on their marvelous, sketches, and they were marvelous, they were sort of, oh, oh yes, I did this today. And I'd be standing there with, well, I did this today. But
Aw.
I came home with these amazing teaching tools for later. Because
Mhm.
also, as I'm sure artists listening will know, your brain will only take in so much at one time, right? Where on the journey where you're at, your brain can only take in what it can learn then. But you go back to those sketches 3 years later, Mr. Kinzer's sketches, after 3 years of life painting on your own, and you will see something that you did not see before. And that's the same with rereading an art book again, or all those things. I mean, and that's a constant surprise to me, how when I go back to things, even now as a sort of older artist in the room, I still go back and go, wow, I didn't take that in at the time. So that
Mhm.
was, again, leaving the ego at the door.
Yes. Yes. And I love that what you said about revisiting because it
Mm,
is so true. When you're at an earlier stage, you can really only see the next couple steps in front of you. But then when you're further along in that journey and you can see other things, you perceive that like the lessons and the advice in a different light
yeah.
because you have all of this other experience that helps create more of that understanding, and that is so vital. And again, that's part of the path of the artist, and continuing forth and practicing like you did with your drawing for a year practice. I think that is so vital and so helpful for anyone who, gosh, my drawing sucks. It's like, well, you got to draw more, you just got to keep practicing with intention.
Totally. I mean, I taught for quite a few years at the Los Angeles Academy of Figurative Art, the California Art Institute, and I did a combined portrait from the model and still life class, because I think we learn from both of those disciplines. If you can paint an apple well, then you can start to paint a face well. But if you can't paint an apple well with good form, it's going to be a challenge for you. But the one thing that I would see, and I was very blessed to have, repeat students there, but that they would come to a certain point in their life sketch, and then it would the thing, well, certain students, and the thing would stop, and it was always the same issue, and I would say to them, well, did you practice your drawing this week? And it was a weekly class. Well, no, I didn't. And I would say, well, next week, go to this range of drawings. I'll show you what to practice, and that will help you. But people get so interested more in the painting than the drawing, I think. And as you said earlier, the drawing is really 90% of the battle.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
I totally get that. Yeah. And I think there's also that point when you're a student where you hit the point of, I don't know what I don't know, which
Mm.
again, brings us back to having that expert eye to tell you like,
Yeah.
no, this is clearly what you're missing. Um, because it can get really complicated, especially at the beginning, because your
Mm.
skills reach a certain point, but your brain hasn't really caught up yet. The understanding hasn't caught up. So
Yeah.
that's where you start feeling like, oh, I don't know anymore.
Yeah.
Can I even draw? Can I even paint?
Well, yeah, and paralysis by analysis, that's
Yes.
a huge one for artists, and including myself. And everything I talk about here, I've done it, I've seen it, I've felt it. One of the biggest battles in my journey has been with my own head, and keeping that part of my process protected. One of the things that happens is when you do start putting your artwork out there publicly, which I have certainly done with my, Face of Endura portrait projects, Face of Malibu, Face of Charleston, and I've done public demos, and a lot of that has been put out online, and in fact, a huge amount. And then you start getting the keyboard warriors having a go at you, and you want to talk about having to protect your head. Then it is so hard, and I felt tremendous sympathy the last few weeks for the British portrait artist Jonathan Yeo, who did the portrait of King Charles, sorry, and really got universally taken down for it on social media. And I had a similar experience last year, not painting King Charles, unfortunately, alas. But I painted a famous chatelaine in France, and I was thrilled to paint her. I've been such a fan. I am such a fan. Wonderful lady, very talented. So we did a live sitting 4 hours for her YouTube channel. It was tied in with my French shadow workshop that I was doing. And, I thought I'd done a pretty good job in 4 hours, and she loved it. She took it away. She was thrilled. Anyway, the portrait dropped, and the sitting video dropped. And really, it was 24 hours where I couldn't get out of bed. And nobody really talks about that side of being an artist, but putting your artwork out there publicly. But the one thing, again, we're learning lessons all the way through the journey. The one thing that I learned was, next time you see somebody being taken down like that, have a lot of empathy for them, because it's not a sport, and that artist, Jonathan Yeo, got the commission because he's a very talented artist. He delivered his style. I mean, come on. So so going back to protecting the head, the mental side of being an artist, whichever stage you're at, I think is the number one thing we have to do. And these days of rampant, feeds and Instagram and all that stuff, it's really quite a challenge. We get the sort of magpie glittering object thing where, oh, I'm just going to try that on for a little bit, and oh, that's great, that glitters, I'm going to go for that. And
Yeah.
I've been guilty of it.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I'm so sorry you went through that because it is so hard because you yourself are proud of yourself, and then other people just have a go at you, and it's not, and they don't, and most of the time those people don't even paint at that level either. They don't, they're oftentimes just, it's easier to criticize when you don't know what you're doing, right? When you don't, or like you don't do the thing. It's like people who watch the Olympics and they criticize a runner because, oh, they could have done better. It's like, do you distance run in the Olympics? Like, there's a big divide there, and I agree. It's so important to protect your head so much,
Definitely.
protect your sensitivity as well, because there are scumbags out there, and like there are
Yeah.
rude people out there who they will say things to just be trolls or just to be really
Yep.
rude, but oftentimes they don't really know. You will only ever be criticized by someone who does less than you. Like, that's what I've read, and
Interesting.
it's so true, because a person who does more than you, what they would do is congratulate you for even
Yeah.
doing it. So it's very important to remember that it's usually people
Yeah.
who don't do as much or don't make as much of an effort, or are just really rude, who who
Yeah.
even try to say mean things like that. So
Mm.
I'm really
Yeah,
glad
and
you
I
made it
think
out the other side.
it took a while, and collectively, I mean, I think it's the art world is a competitive world. I mean, any world where there's commerce involved is going to be competitive.
Mhm,
But I think collectively as artists, we all need to kind of stick together and defend the other, and lift the other up. Share your
mhm.
knowledge. Share your knowledge freely.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, we teach and we want to earn a certain fee for that because we're all trying to pay our mortgages and stuff. But yeah, just be a generous artist and don't be a stingy artist. Like, let's collectively lift each other up and let's aim for that in this crazy world that we live in right now.
Yes, that feels more and more divided for some reason. It's so strange. The more connected we are, the more divided it feels. I blame the
Mm.
internet for that.
Me too.
Yeah.
But
So,
but it is very useful. I mean, in terms of
yes.
marketing and your
Oh, yeah.
brand, I mean, there's never been an easier time to get your artwork in front of eyeballs if your
Mhm.
aim is to sell your art. I
Oh.
have many good friends who they have no interest in selling their art, and they are
Mhm.
fabulous painters. So that doesn't apply to them. But if you are interested in selling your art, getting into galleries or whatever it is, um, the internet is a wonderful tool if used wisely. When I first started, seeking out commissions, there wasn't an internet. It was
Mhm.
all, can you imagine? It was all done by, oh, let's send out a mailer, let's send out a holiday greeting card, et cetera, et cetera. But the good news of that was you were doing direct one-to-one marketing where you
Mhm.
were sending a handwritten note to the person, you knew the person, they knew you. And that is something that I'm still very grateful for, because those early commissions, those people are still now reading my email newsletter. And we're
Mhm.
talking 20 years later, their kids have grown up, and to me, that's something really to learn, that one-to-one is still very, very important. And I think in terms of marketing our art, we have forgotten that, for those of us
Mhm.
that are really in the sort of newer world, digital world, forgotten. And,
Yes.
in my opinion, and I can only speak from my own opinion, but Instagram and Facebook are just part of what I think I should be doing. My main uh, my main thrust is still the as much direct communication as I can get with people is still my goal. I mean, even in the thrust of my artwork, I'm interested in the direct interaction with people, the sitter, the person on the street. I'm a people watcher. I'd rather be sitting in a sidewalk cafe than in a forest. That's just me. I'm interested through my portrait art in the unique thread of humanity that connects us all. And I know from my face project, which was a project done over a good 7 years, and it was tied in with 3 different newspapers, one in Ventura, one in Malibu, and one in Charleston. And the sitter would come in, do a 2-hour sitting, no more, because they're real people, they're not models. And then they would be interviewed for their life story, what they felt about being painted, and that would go into the newspaper cycle. So that, to me, the sitter's life story was as important as, my painted sketch. And some of those sketches talk about putting your ego at the door. They weren't that good, but in fact, a lot of them weren't that good. But my thrust was, or my mission was, the direct interaction. So the moment that person left the room, their essence had gone. And in my opinion, for me, if I start touching it up from a photo afterwards, it looks more polished, but it's not the life force there anymore. So you have this juggle with, and my juggle was, no, I'm doing it that way, and it worked for me. And it was a tremendous experience. I think I did, oh my goodness, 67 people for the face of Ventura, I think 58 for the face of Malibu, and then I did 18 which is one of my most favorite series of portraits, the face of Malibu rebuilds, which was people who had lost their homes in the Woolsey fire. So talk about seeing someone at their lowest, and I interviewed those people and did watercolors of them, when they were no longer in their houses and they were in floods of tears. But yeah, that was the most extraordinary experience. And that will be the thing that I will never forget, the power of that. And I actually get a bit choked up talking about it now, because it was just such a powerful thing, and how also that art, as simple as it was, because these were pen and ink and watercolor drawings, it somehow meant something to them. And also, getting their little story, not little, their big story in the paper about how they lost their fire, what they were doing. And by the way, this was the very early days of the fire. And I was displaced in a hotel too. The backside of my house got badly hit by the fire. So I was doing this from, a hotel that, with a bunch of the fire refugees. And yeah, that's the power of art and how it can help just a little bit. It's not going to bring their house back, but it did help. It was, and I got so many emails after each one of those came out that it meant something to them.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, because that's basically what we seek as creatives, and what we seek as people who make images. The image isn't complete until you have someone who views it, right? And just as you're saying too, with having a sitter, there's that connection, right? You want that, like, you're seeking that connection, and you're seeing them in their most vulnerable state as well, and you're respecting it. Alongside with
Telling their
capturing it,
story.
of course.
Yeah,
Yes,
telling their
telling their
story.
story. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that is
yeah, yeah.
that is, one of the greatest goals, I would say, for someone who is a portrait painter, is, like you said earlier too, to capture that essence of that person, and to basically be a safe place for them to be themselves and to be vulnerable, which, like we were saying earlier
Yeah.
too, there's that. I feel like that's a little bit what's missing in the world today. And I love that you still do, you know, the one-on-one, and you prefer that over online, which I completely agree. Even today, I would recommend for people to do what you're doing with, or what you used to do with sending a postcard, or like
Still
connecting
do.
with those people. Yeah, because I think even today we value that one-on-one connection even more,
Yeah,
also from your reaction to having painted these people and created
yeah.
such amazing, like, such an amazing series of paintings as well. That's a lot of lives that you have touched, which is, oh, I can
Well,
only
and
imagine.
they've touched me too. It's a
Yeah.
two-way street, and the conversations that we had. And by the way, in the face of Ventura, I linked in with a newspaper and all those sitters went onto a radio show too. So after the sketch had been painted. So it really was about, telling their story. And I think that's what made it powerful, actually. And I will say, if you're going to do these kind of things, again, if you're interested in putting your artwork out there in terms of marketing, and we have to talk about marketing,
Yes.
be kind of thinking, well, what is the end game of this as well? Because going off and painting 130 portraits of people is a big time commitment, as you know, doing a show like this. Those things are a time commitment. You've got to arrange it, you've got to do this, that, and the other. And it was a significant part of my yearly thing doing that. So I was very aware right from the beginning that they were never going to be for sale, that they were, I think I sold one of them and then said, well, I did sell one of them and it was a very bad idea, changed my mind and asked if I could have it back and give her a painting instead, which she lovely so agreed to, because this the Boone Special Collections Archives had asked if they could take the Malibu and the Rebuild series into their collection. And she was one of the paintings that was missing. And I needed to have her included. So in terms of marketing and building your brand, you know, just decide where you're, you know, what you're aiming for. I mean, I really wanted those portraits to be archivally stored somewhere. And I just started with that intention from the very beginning. And it took a lot of effort and a lot of very good people in the towns to help me achieve that. And that goes back to the one-on-one contact with people, you know, the people that are your connectors, you know, just, you know, nurture those, the connectors. You know, that somebody famous, and I hope I'm not misquoting, but, you know, if you have 100 sincere collectors, that will last you a lifetime. And I say, if you have 50 serious connectors, you know, people who like you, like your art, and stay with you over the years, that will take you so far. You know, the connectors are as gold as the connectors. Connectors are as gold as collectors. So I would say always have in mind, you know, the mountain you're trying to reach in terms of, you know, well, could this go somewhere? So with the 365 days of drawing, you know, there was a show, there was a book, self-published book, there was a article in American Artist magazine that was. So never think, oh, I've done this, that's it. Like, think, well, what can I do with it afterwards? Because a lot of the stuff for me happened after the individual town projects were finished. The paintings were in storage, and then I said, well, now I start what do we do with this?
Yes. Yeah, that's two great points. At BoldBrush, we inspire artists to inspire the world because creating art creates magic, and the world is currently in desperate need of magic. BoldBrush provides artists with free art marketing, creativity, and business ideas and information. This show is an example. We also offer written resources, articles, and a free monthly art contest open to all visual artists. We believe that fortune favors the bold brush. And if you believe that too, sign up completely free at boldbrushshow.com. That's BoldBrush show.com. The BoldBrush Show is sponsored by Faso. Now more than ever, it's crucial to have a website when you're an artist, especially if you want to be a professional in your career. Thankfully, with our special link, faso.com/podcast, you can make that come true and also get over 50% off your first year on your artist website. Yes, that's basically the price of 12 lattes in 1 year, which I think is a really great deal considering that you get sleek and beautiful website templates that are also mobile friendly, e-commerce, print on demand in certain countries, as well as access to our marketing center that has our brand new art marketing calendar. And the art marketing calendar is something that you won't get with our competitor. The art marketing calendar gives you day by day, step by step guides on what you should be doing today, right now, in order to get your artwork out there and seen by the right eyes so that you can make more sales this year. So, if you want to change your life and actually meet your sales goal this year, then start now by going to our special link, faso.com/podcast. That's faso.com/podcast. Definitely having an end goal, definitely having that,
Yeah.
what am I trying to where am I trying to take my work and why?
Yes.
Because if that gets confused or if there's no goal, then you can get lost. You can lose your way and end up doing something maybe you didn't intend to do. So
Yeah.
it is very good to have that in mind. And I
Yeah.
did want to ask because you've painted so many portraits. I can't imagine a number even because it's probably 1,000 at this point. But I wanted to ask if someone wants to become a portrait painter who takes on
Yeah.
commissions,
Mhm.
where do you recommend that they start?
That's a really good question. I would say start out local, which is exactly what I did. And, paint, if you want to be a portrait painter starting out, first of all, definitely get your skill set a little bit up, because you don't want portraits out there hanging on walls that 20 years later you regret. Now, I had that scenario. And a little bit of black humor, and I hope this is okay to say this, quite a few of those were in Malibu homes, the very early portraits. And 4 of those burnt in the Malibu fires, 4 of those ugly, well, I shouldn't say ugly, but not as good as I would like to see them now. And I remember thinking, gosh, that I feel, of course, feel terrible for the homeowners, but maybe it's not such a bad thing that those portraits actually went. So, and I'm happy to redo them if any of those people ever listen, and those lovely people know who they are. I'm happy to redo the portraits. Edward Jonas, who was the former chairman of the Portrait Society of America, who died sadly in a terrible accident a couple of years ago. He did an article called Getting Started in International Artist Magazine. Let me check I got that right. Yes, and he actually featured me in that, and Rose Franson and Garen Baker, 3 artists that have gone into their communities and started to look around. What can I do? Could it be a collection of parks, a collection of whatever, a collection of patisseries, or I don't know, but fruit, whatever, people. And he said, this. I thought it was very interesting. And if anyone wants a copy of that article, I'm not sure if you can get it online, just email me and I'd be happy to Xerox it and send it to you the old-fashioned way, or email. So yeah, and then he had this quote in that article, which I think really sums up an awful lot for me. Ed says, "I've always said success is a result of a continued effort toward becoming the finest artist possible, and then getting your work before as many people as possible." So when you're starting out as a beginning portrait artist, I would say start local, and very quickly get a website. I think websites are still very important. I believe that people think, oh, I'm not ready for that yet. As soon as you've got a few good images, you're ready. It's your portable portfolio. So definitely do that. And then your biggest asset, honestly, is your subscriber list. So always carry cards around, always have, a little, your iPhone ready to take the contact, and by the way, we still have to ask to add people to our subscriber list. I'm stunned by the number of people still who just add you on to their list, that you're not legally, you're not allowed to do that, just so people know that you have to ask for permission. So, enter local art shows, and if you want to be a portrait artist, enter portraits. If you want to be a landscape artist, it's that goal you're trying to reach. Art fairs. I did a lot of art fairs in the early days, and paint in your art booth. People don't like static things, but they love it when an artist is painting. And, they will come up behind you. It's not intimidating. People always love watching artists create. I used to do that, and it was successful to me. Open studios. You can have an open studio in your living room and do it online to, Facebook Live or something like that. You can have, once you've built up a little body of work, you can have, a holiday party at your house. I've done a lot of that, and it's been very successful. It's about that direct thing again, and, you can sell all sorts of things at those things, little landscape studies. I mean, I do landscape studies, little still lives. Obviously, you're not going to be selling them for thousands at a holiday open house at your home, but sales are sales. And think about starting to build your resume, quite early on. Enter local art shows repeatedly. Once you've built up a few successes there, which you will, then start going out to further afield art shows. That's what I did. You start entering national art shows and hopefully get a bit of leeway there, but that takes time. So yes, I'm just trying to think what else somebody could do who's starting out. Basically, anybody you meet, just think of them as a potential person to like your artwork and show them. Going on airplanes, I can't tell you how great that has been for me. You know,
Mhm.
start talking. Hey, this is what I do. Oh, and here's my card. I mean, I've given out so many cards at airports,
Mhm.
and make those cards the best you can afford. The
Yes.
best you can afford. I mean, I have been a long believer. I'm not sure we can see this. Can you see that?
Wow, yeah. It's
But in like
lovely.
a little glossy brochure,
That's cool.
and you got your
That's
bio there,
genius.
and people just take it. And even though it's quite large,
Mhm.
people go, oh, they put it in their
Yeah.
bag. Yeah. So just remember that everybody you meet, you're selling yourself and your journey as an artist, whether it's whatever the art form, your unique selling point, as they call it in marketing, your USP. People are buying your story. And your soul, your passion. I hate the word buying, but it's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
There's an artist on every street corner all over the world, and there are usually some very, very good artists on every street corner all over the world. You have to tell the world if you want to sell your art, or if you don't. What about your art? What's your story? What is your story? And my story, because I had to think about this, my story is, I'm a storyteller of people. you know
Mhm.
i'm I'm not somebody, one of my dear friends, Jeremy Lipking, who is the most incredible artist and just,
Mhm.
jaw-droppingly good and a super, super nice guy, no ego, someone who's as massively successful as he is. Um, Jeremy is obviously one of the world's best figurative artists and creates these incredible stories through his canvases and just top notch. I'm not that artist, I'm a artist that wants to tell the story of the person, and I think that is why really portraiture it's my heart and soul, and I do some figurative work, but that's my story. And that's what you has to work out, what are you? Who are you as an artist? What are you trying to tell the world? I mean, when I looked at your website, Laura, and I saw the beauty of your work, I could tell what your story was. Your message is very clear. And I think that is what we have to get over, because also there are very few artists that can do it all and do it all really well. I mean, still life landscape figure, they are there, obviously Jeremy, Dan Gerhartz, and Richard Schmidt and all those
Mhm.
great guys. But generally speaking, it's so hard to get really good at being a painter that it does help if you have an area that you really are into and you hone in on that and you go, okay, I want to be a portrait artist. That's my mountain that I'm trying to reach. And the other thing I like, I've been really interested recently in this motivational author called James Clear, and
Mhm.
he's written a very successful book called Atomic Habits. And he doesn't call it a mountain, he calls it an iceberg, right? So and this was very interesting. I was just listening to his masterclass on the plane back from New York last week. So he calls it an iceberg. And what is that iceberg bit at the top there? Maybe it's a collection of still life paintings you're trying to sell, or a art workshop internationally, or whatever, or getting a big portrait commission. So you've got the tip of the
Mhm.
iceberg, and then you have underneath the water, you have to get your systems in place. He calls it your systems in place, because chances are, if you don't put those systems in place, you're not going to get that workshop filled internationally, or you're not going to get that big commission, or you're not going to get that collection of beautiful still lifes into a gallery. And those systems in place, of course, are all the things that we have talked about. You know,
Yes.
your subscriber list, you're getting in front of as many eyeballs as you can, but a fairly worked out plan of what you are going to do to make that happen. And the other thing he talks about is that just do a little bit every day, because sometimes the task seems so overwhelming, and I have felt that. Um, that you kind of go, oh, so okay, you've got to go and write another newsletter, and you don't know what on earth you're going to write about yourself, because it's a
Mhm.
delicate balance. You're selling yourself in a newsletter, but you have to make it look like you're not.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Because it
so
can feel a little bit slimy.
yeah, and I'm sure quite a few of mine have felt slimy, but because you're selling.
Yes.
But so probably it's something that I put off. I mean, I certainly don't do more than 4 a year. My list do not wanna hear from me every month, that's for sure,
Mhm.
and actually 3 a year is better for me. But I put it off, because it's just overwhelming, and you've gotta do all the
Yes.
links, and you've gotta do this, and you do that, and I'm like, "Oh,
The
I'll do that
images.
tomorrow. I'll do that
Mhm.
tomorrow." And then I'll, say, "Well, if I just go in and do 5 minutes today, just put a few images in there, and then do 5 images tomorrow, and then the thoughts that I want to write about will actually come to me," because obviously the images are usually something that you've been creating recently, or and then also
Mhm.
share something if you can, about how to frame or hang a painting in the best possible way, or try and share a
Mhm.
little bit too. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that because, it is so easy to get overwhelmed as an
Mm.
artist, especially because I really like to compare it to the 80-20 rule. It's a little bit like what you said about the iceberg, where if you want 20%, right? 20% is the important stuff, right? But it takes 80% of everything else that of those systems. Those systems are that 80%
Yeah.
of making sure you're even painting,
Hmm.
of reaching out to collectors, of updating your website, of sending out the newsletters, of basically keeping everything just in order so that you get
Mm.
that little 20% at the top that's peeking out of that iceberg. Which can be really overwhelming. And also, I
Yes.
love the Kaizen thing where taking it a little bit at a time, doing a little bit each day. It's kind of like if you have a giant cake in front of you, right? You can't eat the whole thing in one sitting, but you can eat a little piece every day, and before you know it, the cake is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so true. And the other thing I really liked about Mr. Clear is that he
Mhm.
said saying no, and this is something that I think I have learned over the years, but it was good to see it in writing. Saying no is the biggest productivity hack,
Yes.
because how many times do we say yes to things that take up so much time? So if you're going to say yes to something, maybe to the more beginner artists building their careers, if you're going to say yes to something, make sure that yes is leading you to your goal. I have said yes to so many things over the last 25 years that I thought would benefit me. And, it just turned out, well, wow, that just took a huge chunk of my day, my week, when I could have been painting and doing that newsletter.
Yes. All the important stuff. And
Yeah.
actually, that makes me wonder a little bit because, you've been painting portraits for so long that
Mm.
you obviously now you have the experience and now you know what to say yes and no to. But I wanted to ask you, what is, maybe what is one of the key rules or some of the key rules that you personally follow as a portrait painter who's taking on a commission?
Sure. Well, certainly the number one thing which I learned on my first commission is always work with a contract. Always, always, always. And you can download some contracts off the internet. I'd be very happy to share mine if anyone wants a an idea of how to do it. It's really important. And there's certain wording that you should probably have, like how you settle claims if there is a situation, which I've never had, but I learned
Mhm.
from Calvin Goodman, a great art marketer, now no longer with us, that clause has to be in there. So work with a contract. And I also wrote about this for BoldBrush, Fine Art Views. Um, don't believe in fairy tales. You can Google that. That article is online. Don't believe in fairy tales. Working with a contract. And this also applies if you work with an art model. If you bring an art model into your home studio to paint, you need to have a contract with them. Um,
Mhm.
Okay, so that's the first big one, and in that contract should be details of the commission, the deposit, the final payment, your process, what your portrait, the details of your conversation with the client as to what the portrait is going to be, uh, all of it. So everything you can think of, but try and get it to 2 pages. No one wants to do any more than that. it also makes you look very professional when someone cold calls you off the internet, which often happens to me, and I say, well, we will exchange a contract. It's in the interest of both parties. It protects you, it protects me. And I haven't had a single person get funny about that. The second big thing in the process is a non-refundable deposit, right? Now, I used to do 60% and 40% on satisfactory completion. Now I'll get as much of that deposit down as I can. Yeah, so, but case by case basis. But generally, I'd be shooting for a 60% non-refundable deposit. You don't start the portrait or the painting, landscape, whatever, until that deposit has cleared your account. You don't buy any supplies for it, nothing, no work stuff, because you've already invested a lot of time by this point to get to that contract. I mean, I've chased portrait commission leads for 2 years before I've actually got to the contract bit. It's a cat and mouse game sometimes, and you have to be prepared as a portrait artist to do that. They don't just roll in and on the day you sign the contract. It's a little bit of a dance, and I actually enjoy that dance. So I would also say do your preparatory sketches for you, not for the client. Do not show the artist the prep sketch. I used to do that. I did that when I worked with a portrait agency, which I was working with a lot. They've since shut down, and they liked me to do a prep sketch for the client. I hated it. The client has no idea how that prep sketch is going to be on a 6-week painting. It's just impossible. And you're already being judged to a negative sometimes on that prep sketch. So now I don't do that, but I do the prep sketch for me, for sure. Very important. The other thing I would say is only show the client the portrait when it is finished for you.
Okay.
Don't show the portrait ahead of that time, because it's about protecting your art brain, your art creativity. The moment you show it and they have a slight negative thing to say or not, you're kind of, you're going on a downward spiral a little bit rather than finishing it to your satisfaction. And I'm sure, Laura, like me, you're type A, I'm very type A, and that portrait is not going to be finished. It's going to be looking pretty good by the time I show it to them, because I'm, a bit like crazy like that. And then, tips for, maybe more starting out is you have to be willing to make changes on your portrait. If you have a problem with that, you should not go into the commissioned arena. When you're working on a portrait commission, you are working with the client on your shoulder. And if you're working with a portrait agency, which I often have done, you're working with the portrait agent on your shoulder and the portrait agency on your shoulder. So you've got 3 people. That is very hard. Yeah, I made that rule pretty early on that, in the contract, I put a 2-week grace period for changes. Okay. And they should be minor, because by this point you should have had such good communication with your client. We're doing this, we're doing that. You do a photo shoot. I usually do a live sitting on the photo shoot as well, like an hour and a half, an hour quick life sketch. And I will tell them, look, but they're there in person, so I can explain it a bit better than perhaps sketches in the studio. Look, this is like a doctor taking his notes, and they see the process, so they know that this is quick, right? It's different from the prep sketch where they haven't seen you create it. So in more recent times, I came to the conclusion that, this 2-week window was a little unfair. I would have people, for instance, come back 2 years later and say, I want the hands changed. Yeah, actually, it was 3 years later. And I thought to myself, it was a lovely client in Malibu. It was a client where you wanted that portrait on the wall. It's a double portrait.
Oh, wow.
And I said to myself, yeah, you're going to do that, because I'm not in the business to have paintings on walls that people hate. Or put in the cellar. I mean, I know it happens to all of us. John Singer Sargent had, if you've read any of his commission stories, believe it or not, he had people who didn't like some of his commissions, the clients, and that's impossible to believe. But it happens to everybody. It's the nature of the beast. The portrait commission world is an ego-based business, talking about that again. So now my take on it as I've got older, and I have done a lot of portrait commissions, is I really want people to be happy. I mean, certainly you're never going to have someone come back to you and say, I want the figure completely changed. That's just not going to happen if you've done your communication ahead of time well.
Mhm.
Is it irritating when something like that happens? Yes, but you're working with the person's people business, and the goal is to have a client that is 110% satisfied. And it's good for business because you do not want people out there, particularly on the world right now where people can get on Yelp, whatever it is, and you don't want to run the risk of people running into people saying, oh, well, she did a blah, 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 and she was hard to work with. And that's not going to get you more work. It's not good for, and I hate to keep talking about business and selling, but the portrait commission world is selling. So I learned so much about that. In fact, it really was a selling business, working with an agent, portrait agent. I mean, that
That's
was
so fascinating.
quite an eye-opener.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, since you mention it, because I mean, I am kind of aware of how some portrait commissions work, where you do, as a portrait painter, sign up for some sort of, like you said, like an agency where they
Mhm.
connect you with people who are looking for a portrait.
Yeah.
Would you also recommend that, or do you prefer to go on your own and do it on your own?
Well, I'm still with 3 portrait reps. So
Okay.
my big agency, Portrait South, closed down a couple of years ago because the
Mhm.
business wasn't there for them anymore, which was a shame because it had been a family business for a long time, and they were a great agency. I really enjoyed working with them. Would I recommend working with an agent? Yes. And I will tell you what, though, agencies are very, very hard to get into because the skill set of young artists like yourself, your training in Florence and all that stuff, we have now, which we didn't have when I started, this incredible body of young students who are highly trained, like
Mhm.
yourself. And you can't deny it. They've done the ateliers, they've done their training, and then they've put their own voice on it. That is there. And there's, it's, and also classical realism is really what's in right now within the agencies.
Mhm.
And really, I think in the fine art world. So if you're more of a big brush bold painter like me, it's a little bit harder.
Mm.
That's to put anybody off, because I certainly have people who like that type of work. Otherwise, I wouldn't get commissions. One should also bear in mind that the portrait agencies take 40%. That's 40.
Wow.
So, if you're selling a painting that's in the several thousand mark, you're going to be giving several thousand to the agency, which,
Mhm.
the galleries take that too, right? The plus side of that is you wouldn't get the commissions that you're getting through the agency. So, I got to do a lot of religious portraits, some bishops, I did quite a few Episcopalian bishops. Actually, one commission I got through myself, but I wouldn't have got those commissions
Yep.
without that agency. And they do handle all the payment. They do handle all the travel. They handle all the travel details, all the hotel details. So, that is, you're paying for that though. But yes, I would highly recommend that people seek out portrait agents. Portrait Inc. is the top one, the hardest to get into. That's the top one. I have been trying to get into that agency for about 20 years. I was a finalist in 2008, and they kept my portfolio for a year and then returned it because they wanted to focus getting, there was not as much work around because of the crash. And they were very
Mhm.
polite and said they wanted to um, get their existing artists more work. But no, I've tried seriously to get into there every year for about, I think about 20 years. That tells you what it's like. So, and that's the other thing that we as artists, we have to learn to handle the disappointments. And Ray Kinsler talked about that a lot. And one story that he would say was he had two certificates on his mantelpiece, same painting, entered into a competition the year before, rejection letter. The next year, he got the gold medal for the painting, and he kept it side by side, those two certificates, to remind him that you have to enter art competitions, I guess,
Mhm.
but you can't judge yourself by it too much. You're dealing with somebody else's, the judge's idea of who you are, and whether they like this, that, or the other. So yeah.
Yeah. That is so cool though. The fact that, there are agencies
Yeah.
and I really love what you just said that Ray Kinsler said, because it's so true. As artists, we face so much rejection.
Yeah.
And again, if you let your ego get wrapped up in all of that, you're just going to end up suffering over nothing, because truly you'll have a set of judges who will say like, oh, well, this person was better. It doesn't mean that your work was bad. It just meant that maybe they preferred someone else's. And
Yeah.
then likewise, oh, well, this year the judges thought, oh, this one's the strongest piece and we really liked it. So
Yeah.
it really, like you said, it does depend. And it's the same with galleries. It's the same with even with those portrait agencies where,
Mm.
oh, you just don't fit I guess, the roster that we want to have just because of this. And
Right.
maybe you might fit it the year after if they
Right.
change their
Yeah.
people, their administration. So you never really know. It is a game of a little bit of like waiting and just trying, dipping your toes a little bit, and then okay, the water isn't ready for me yet, basically.
Right. Well, that old phrase,
Working.
persistence meeting opportunity, I mean, and styles do change. I remember, because I watched this stuff quite closely, and suddenly it was like,
Mhm.
after the Obama portrait, the green background or the leaf background, and suddenly I noticed, more modern artists are coming in,
Mhm.
popular. Liz Lindstrom is an artist, a much more modern a take on portraiture, and she is one of
Mhm.
Portraits Inc.'s busiest artists, quite rightly so. Stunning work. So that they do look for different things, different years,
Mhm.
and it's fine. I mean, you know, talk about the disappointments. And this is another thing that Ray taught me. You have to just keep chewing on an old, like on the bone, or chipping away at the marble block. You've just got to keep chipping away. You can't let. There are going to be obstacles. Your face is not going to fit sometimes in certain groups and things, but you just keep going. You keep going
Yes.
because you have something that you want to share with the world through your art.
Yes, definitely. Oh, he was very wise.
He sure
And
was. He sure was.
yes, yes, I love
Yes.
everything that you've said, that he has said, because it is, oh, it's all
Yeah.
those little things. They really add up,
Yeah.
it's amazing. And then
Yeah.
I I did want to ask you too. Is there something that you wish you had known when you first
Mm.
started in terms of like marketing or branding that, would have really helped your career? Or do you find that, it's changed so much that it doesn't maybe apply?
I think it has changed so much, but I personally have always understood from my previous careers, that you have to kind of hustle a little bit. You have to put it out there. I understood that from quite early on.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I don't have any regrets looking back, or I remember that I had a huge learning curve around when the camera went digital. I remember
Mm.
that. I think that would be the thing that I would maybe explain a little bit, that my learning curve, having to get used to maintaining a website, going from regular photography on a portrait shoot to digital photography, and the getting really comfortable with loading it all up on the computer with the client watching you, back in the day when this was new.
Mhm.
That to me was really quite a big learning curve, and quite terrifying actually. And then just when you think you've got it down, you've learned how to make the video for Facebook and Instagram. Then it's like, now it's a reel. And someone said to me the other day, who is pretty successful on Instagram as a sort of influencer, how to build more followers.
Mhm.
Your videos are really not good. And I thought about it for a second, and I said to myself, I'm not a
Mhm.
content creator. I'm not. That's not my job. And I'd rather spend more time involved in learning Renaissance gilding, which is what I'm going down the rabbit hole in right now, than learning how to create a
Mhm.
super duper professional video. And if that's going to turn you off as someone who follows my art, then we're probably not going to be friends.
Yes. Yeah. You're right. That is really one of the hardest things today as an artist too is you're not just excuse me, you're not just painting, right? You're painting and then you're also editing videos. So now you're also a video editor and a movie maker basically, and maybe
Yeah.
even a sound mixer because you have to figure out how to make the sound good. And then like it's basically the painting falls down to like this level and
Yes.
everything else is up here, which it can be really overwhelming, and I completely understand why a lot of people are abandoning Instagram and maybe just sticking to Facebook or just sticking to, well, I already have my collectors. I'd rather
Mm,
just, meet people in person, go to exhibitions, and like just stick to the in-person connections, because it truly
mm.
can be overwhelming. And
Absolutely. We have
yeah,
to limit our time on it, again, protecting that headspace and
mhm,
limit our time. And but it is useful. It's free eyeballs,
it is,
you
and it
know.
is.
So if we're just a little bit, I mean, I'm sure sort of the younger folk listening would probably disagree with me, because I am sort of older now and, I'm not a whiz on things, and maybe younger people are a whiz on Instagram things, reels, etc. But I think if we just are a little bit sensible about it, maybe posting and, some background of how you're creating your artwork, so you're sharing, you're not
Mhm,
just constantly me, which we all do from time to time, myself included. I think that should be good enough. And the thing about all this stuff is the algorithms change constantly. I
mhm,
mean, every day almost. And I think people are getting overwhelmed. I think people are doing that. I've got to go somewhere else for a bit. And, so let's not get burnt out on it. If you need to shut it off for a bit and not post for a week or two, do that. Because, they are designed, particularly the scrolling on the iPhone, it is designed to get you into a negative space. That's how they keep you
mhm,
scrolling. Facebook too, it's designed to get you in a negative mood, angry mood. So we've
mhm.
got to be careful about that. And again, comparing ourselves to all these other artists that are supposedly, doing better, doing this, that, the other.
Mhm, mhm, and oftentimes it's a front, right? People only show what they wanna show.
Right.
So I personally, I have not posted in well over a year, maybe even 2 years at this point,
Great.
because I got tired of chasing and running and then the algorithm, and I wanted to focus more on my work and myself, so I totally understand it. But I definitely like, I mean, if someone knows how to do it and they know how to handle it, that's
Great.
awesome.
Great.
Great, keep going,
Great.
teach
Yeah.
me, I'll hire you.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's overwhelming, being an artist, you have to have so many hats.
So many
You do your
hats.
taxes, you find the commissions, you talk to people, you like, there's so much that goes into being, a self-employed artist,
Yeah.
so it's really tough. But speaking of, self-employment and how artists we have usually lots of things that we do to also supplement income, right? And you mentioned Renaissance gilding. So
Yes.
that reminded me of your upcoming workshop in France. Can you tell us about
Absolutely, I'd be delighted to tell you about it.
it?
So, it's going to be launched, July 12th of this year, through mannerandmaker.com. I did this retreat last September at a different chateau in France. I'm very interested in the French chateau world. I love old things. I love romance.
Mhm,
The last retreat was so wonderful, an immersive thing, good food, good wine, culture, history,
mhm,
and of course painting. So I knew I wanted to do it again, and I found this great chateau called Chateau Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and lovely host Sarah and Stephen. So I'm doing another retreat. We're going to be doing some gilding, some basically elevating your art through new things, gilding, palette knife work, tone, color, texture, and all the great things of staying at a chateau. So we've got two Le Cordon Bleu Paris chefs coming in. I wanted more day trips this time, out and about. So we're going to go to the market to pick up our still life with the Paris chefs. We're going to go to the Brocante to pick up our china for the still life. And I will be teaching simple gilding, how you can put that into some of your paintings. Because to teach medieval gilding, which I have actually been learning and doing, it's a very labor intensive situation. Certainly not enough to do in 5 days around all the other things we're doing. So simplify gilding, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be next summer, July 5th to 25th, and that's my little card. You can see it.
Oh, that's so fun. Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
Yeah,
Yes.
so looking forward to that. And yeah, I mean, I don't teach a lot anymore, but I love the immersive experience of teaching, and just seeing people's eyes light up to the new surroundings, and it's great. I love it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that
Yeah.
brings it back to connection, which is,
Yes.
yeah, you
Yes.
get that with students, especially one on one.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then where else can people find more of your work?
JohannaSpinks.com is a good place to start. The links are all there to the social medias. And yeah, and if you want to email me any questions you have about any of the stuff I've talked about, JohannaSpinks.com. Sorry, Johanna at JohannaSpinks.com. Yes.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Johanna, for your
Thank you,
time
Laura.
and for sharing all your tips. Oh my gosh, that was
Thank you.
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a delight. And thanks everyone for listening to me.
Yes.